Good day, potheads and political junkies. You're watching Cannabis Culture News Live. I'm Jeremiah Vandermeer. This is Jody Emery I'm standing with here. And we are broadcasting in our new set here. Check it out. In the Pod TV studios, we finally moved from our downstairs studio up here in the nice area where it's nice and quiet and there's nobody running around in the background and stuff. So it should be a little less of the hiccups, hopefully. Anyways, so Jody's here, first off, to talk to us about some stuff that's happening with Mark. We just got word this morning about it. But today's show, I just want to quickly tell you, is a big election show. Big week this week for all our Canadian viewers. Obviously, if you haven't seen the news yet, Harper and the Conservative government was found in contempt of Parliament. And then a no-confidence motion eliminated their government. So we have an election on May 2nd coming up. Very, very important that you guys get out and vote. And we're going to have Mr. Chris Bennett, the cannabis historian, on to talk about Stephen Harper and some of his crazy anti-pot thoughts. And we're also going to have Jacob Hunter on to talk about activism in Canada and how you guys can get involved and how we can kick the Harper government out. That's what we need to do. So first off, we're not going to do any of the news stuff today. We're going to go straight to what's going on here with Mark. And here is the Princess of Pot, Jody Emery. What's up, Jody?
Well, today I got a phone call at 4 a.m. from Mark, which is 7 a.m. his time, and he said he had been woken up and told to pack up all his property because he's being moved somewhere else. And they don't tell you where you're going. You just get told that you're going to be leaving. So he called me again a bit later to let me know that they told him he'd be going out on Monday. So we don't know how long he'll be on the road or where he's going. I'm hoping that it'll be California at Taft, where he was supposed to go originally. But we'll see what happens. I just hope for the best and hope everyone else is hoping for the best too.
So last time Mark was moved, he was moved from much closer to us, all the way down there, and it did take a long time at that time. He sort of had to jump from prison to prison before he got there.
Yeah.
Do we know at all anything that's happening with where he might be going? Like we know he might be going to Taft or there's one other spot.
He might go back to Oklahoma City Sorting Center. It's a big facility that most prisoners go through. It's right next to the airport, so the prisoner Con Air jets can just drop them off right at the prisons. And then you get sent where you get sent. I think Mark found out he was going to D-Ray when we got to that facility. But before then, he was in Nevada, and he thought he was going to Taft. But Mark got to Georgia and found out that most people were spending months and months on the road, far longer than he was. So that's an ordeal that he might have to go through. But, I hope that it's not, and everybody just thinks that that's not our reality. His reality is to be quickly settled somewhere better.
People in the comments are suggesting Puerto Rico. They're setting Mark in Puerto Rico.
It has to be, there's certain things that it has to be. It has to be a private prison because all the prisons for foreigners are privately run facilities. So there's only a certain number of those. And then it has to be lower minimum security.
Right.
And so that's a certain number of prisons too. So I don't know, there's about 5 in Texas, 1 in Mississippi, 1 in North Carolina, 1 in Ohio, 1 in Pennsylvania, which might be a better one because a lot of Canadians are there apparently, and Taft, and did I say New Mexico? And there's another one in Georgia, but I don't know, Mark might just be going north into McRae. That's the other facility, but we won't know until he gets there, and our lawyer's trying to find out, and Mark is going to try and find out, but usually he just calls when he finally gets money somehow into his account or calls me collect. And it's a very challenging ordeal when you get moved from a prison because you lose all your friends. A lot of the inmates were crying. A wife called me up. I was going to go visit Mark with her this upcoming weekend, and that's canceled now. But her husband, Bradley, he was crying on the phone to her, just totally distraught about it. And some of the other inmates are too, because Mark changes people's lives, so they're pretty sad to see him go, and there'll definitely be a void there. But it just means Mark will go on to help other people, and I said, what you're doing is you're leaving behind 2,000 inmates who can hold hands during visits, who can get all the things that they've been able to get, typewriters and books and guitars and music and different things because of his efforts. So
exactly.
And that's what his mission is. I said, you just have to suffer
Another prison
to help
needs
others.
him.
Yeah.
Well, and now the prison that Mark's been at for the last little while here is run by a private corporation called the Geo Group, and potentially some of the other prisons is it possible they'll be run by the GEO group as well?
I looked up all of the prisons that the BOP has contracted out, so I don't know which companies run which ones. I've only looked up a few of them. I'm going through a list and trying to find out as much info as I can. But when it comes to private prisons, there's not a lot of info at all. And you know, Mark wrote the book on D. Ray James. I mean, it's the only private prison that anyone can find anything about because Mark wrote about it. So, you know, he's giving a look into the private prison industry, and hopefully, I don't know, maybe that can bring more attention to it and prevent it from happening here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Somebody's got to be in there recording what's going on there, my God. And I guess I think we've all learned a lot about what really goes on behind the scenes there, and we're all, you know, even more prison activists now, you know, learning those personal stories about all the people, because it's not just Mark. I mean, there's many good people in jail, you know, and Mark's in an immigration prison, so these people aren't violent criminals or anything. A lot of them are being sent back to their countries and stuff.
People who, got busted, you know, with a small petty drug crime or something, and they find out that they're not a citizen, and suddenly they're set up to be deported. But, you know, I was explaining, CKNW Radio just called me every few months. They call to get an update on Mark, and I just let them know about all this. And he said, well, why would they move him? And I explained that in the private prison industry, you know, the prisoners are stock, and the prisons are warehouses, and you can't just let your stock sit in warehouses. You've got to move them around. And GEO Group, which runs the prison Mark is in, also runs a prison building business, so they can construct your prison. They have a company that does training for people to run a prison. They run the prison for people, and they run the transportation. So they have GEO buses and GEO transport and GEO care. I just read an article actually on National Public Radio about GEO Group, and they've realized it's the first year ever that the U.S. prison population has dropped, and it's because people are looking towards alternative methods to incarceration. So now the private prison industry, GEO in particular, has been setting up all sorts of, you know, different types of alternatives to prison. They oversee various addiction facilities or whatnot. So it's interesting to see how the industry will morph and change. And again, who knows how long Mark will be there, but he'll, let's hope he gets home in a year, and that's the soonest. And please go to freemark.ca and send letters to the Department of Justice, because they're considering his application, and it's taking longer than usual, according to our lawyers. So that means there's some scrutiny going on.
Somebody's looking at it somewhere.
And so there might be some opposition, but if we get enough support, I got Representative Dickerson, who invited me to Washington State. She sent off a letter today to the Transfer Division saying that Mark should be brought home, and I'm going to get more people. I've got to work on that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's good, Jody. So far, so good, and let's hope that the move is quick. That's the thing I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
'Cause last time it was, Mark said that some of the other people didn't have it as quick as he did.
And being on the road is terrible, because you don't ever settle down to get visits, so you won't have visits. You won't get a commissary because you're not able to buy anything fast enough if you keep being moved. And you don't get mail because there's no address to get to you. So it's referred to as diesel therapy or bus therapy, and a number of people have gone through it. People that I know, Todd McCormick has been through it. He's a cannabis activist, and it's just part of the cruelty of this war on drugs, that people like Mark and nonviolent drug offenders are being shipped around like cattle, or it's sick.
Yep.
Sick, so.
Yeah, as you said, they're the stock, they're the commodity, they're the thing that's making the cash. It's a slave trade. Yeah. All that free labor and all the money that comes from maintaining that.
Like the manufacturing jobs didn't all leave America, and there's a whole bunch still in the U.S. Just the prisoners do it for slave wages, because they won't trust anyone else to build the bombs and build all the military stuff. They have to use.
It's the only way we can compete with China.
Yeah, use slave labor, prisoners. So, yeah, that's.
Wow. Well, definitely everybody out there, hope for the best. Go to freemark.ca and find out how you guys can help. And, one of the reasons that Mark is down there right now is because of our conservative government. They are actually the ones who sent Mark down there. They could have stopped it from happening. They weren't there initially in 2005 when it all started, but they could have stopped it at any time, and they didn't. And they sent Mark down wholeheartedly. In fact, even more than what they were asking for. They're like, take him, charge him with everything. And so that's why we need to get this conservative government out. And that's what we're going to talk about now with Chris Bennett and Jacob Hunter. We're going to talk about getting the Conservatives out of power in this country. And at the very least, if we don't get them out of power, we cannot let them form a majority government. Because if we thought they were bad with their minority government and able to do a lot of damage with the minority government, can you imagine what they're going to get away with a majority government and a stacked Senate? It will not be good. Jody, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Yeah. And Jody does a show every week on Cannabis Culture and Pot TV, yes, and you guys can find Jody's show there as well. Chris, come on. Chris Bennett, cannabis historian, former editor of Pot TV, manager of Pot TV. He probably remembers this desk that we have.
Yeah, I do. The old Pot TV news desk for sure.
That's right. Bringing it back here. How do you like the new set?
Looks good, yeah.
It's all right.
Like the corner?
Yeah, love the corner and the bricks. Cool, Chris. So the reason that I brought you on here today is here. I'm going to move the camera up a little bit. Not everybody's quite as short as Jody and I.
I know I still have a little hair left.
That's right. That's right. Here we go. And Jacob's even more of a beast, and he just walked in the door.
There we go.
I'm a beast.
Tall man is what I mean.
Oh.
And a beast in other ways, I'm sure. But anyways.
Jeremiah, yeah,
So Chris has written an article which is on the front page of Cannabis Culture right now. It's an awesome article. You guys have to read it. St. Stephen and the Theocons versus the Devil's Weed. And so quickly, before we go into talking about sort of what Chris gets into in his article, which is Stephen Harper's crazed evangelical thoughts and how that affects his cannabis prohibition efforts, just wanted to go over quickly exactly what the Conservatives have been doing. For those who are watching from the States, or for those who aren't, drug war fanatics and know everything that's going on, the Conservatives have been basically juggernauting through with bills and other methods, going behind the scenes and changing regulations to try and make things harder on cannabis people in Canada. They don't like marijuana users, really. And we've seen bills. We had Bill S10, which is the latest incarnation of it. Before that, it was Bill C15 and Bill C26. And in that bill, he had mandatory minimums. They had mandatory minimum sentences, jail sentences for marijuana, very small crimes. Growing 6 plants could end you in jail for 6 months. If you're baking cookies and sharing them with other people, that's 18 months mandatory minimum sentence. And all of those go up if you happen to be in an area where a park is, or if there's aggravating factors in some way. So these laws are really, really harsh. Those aren't the only ones. Those were the bills that made it through. In the Senate, they actually passed that bill. But luckily, Bill S10, the one I'm talking about, was killed with this latest parliamentary scandal that happened with them being in contempt and then, of course, being kicked out by the other parties. And I'm going to talk about this with Jacob when he comes up about the difference between a minority and a majority government and what that means and why that's so important. But first off, we should start talking to Chris here about how Harper has been trying to... let's see here. So first off, obviously we all know that prohibition exists for a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of powerful people in the world who don't want cannabis to be legalized. A lot of them want get profits from other things that cannabis would replace, or the hemp industry, and there's lots of other reasons. Of course, it's a control mechanism on the people. The authorities, that gives a lot of cops jobs. So these unions are strong in the US, and in Canada there's all the same type of problems. But Chris, in his article, looks at a different reason that Stephen Harper may be a weed hater and why he wants us all in jail. So Chris, why? What is this sort of angle you're taking here?
Well, Harper's a member of the Alliance Church, and this is an evangelical church that has an anti-gay agenda, anti-abortion, anti-stem cell research, and also an anti-marijuana agenda. And when Bush was in power, I started researching these evangelicals, which are often strong proponents of prohibition. And I really think of the roots of prohibition in our modern world as Christians versus the devil's weed in many ways. It may have grown into more things like Jeremiah was saying, the influence of police unions and whatnot that are interested in seeing their means of harvest available.
Right.
And whatnot. But what it goes back to, and this is also to do with the witch burnings in medieval times, is references in the book of Revelation to sorcery. And the word we translate as sorcery in modern Bibles like the King James and other Bibles comes from an old Greek word, pharmakia. And this is the same word that we get our modern word pharmacy from, but in these days it meant magical or healing use of certain plants. And because of this, they persecuted witches for sorcery. They were using magical and healing plants for ritual purposes and healing purposes. And likewise today, many evangelicists have a campaign against marijuana and other substances because of these evangelical references to sorcery, and they see the things like the book of Revelation references to sorceries in the modern medical marijuana movement as being one and the same thing. In fact, in my article, I linked to a Christian tractate that deals with this subject, and also a sermon which I've added some sinister music and graphics to by a Christian minister talking about these same references. And we know that people that influenced George Bush were talking to George Bush about these references, and George Bush was a very apocalyptic president. And likewise, Harper is surrounded by a cabal of Christian evangelicists who believe, due to references in the Old Testament Psalms about dominion which reigns from sea to sea to the Great River, that this is a reference to Canada. And somehow Canada plays a role in biblical prophecies of the end times, a subject that's really dealt with well in a great book, The Armageddon Factor, The Rise of Christian Nationalism in Canada, which I can highly recommend, and there's links to all those things in my article.
Right. And so now, how do we know? Like, Harper goes to church all the time. In that book, you know,
he won't answer questions about his evangelical belief. Well, you know, the guy doesn't answer questions about anything. That's how he's maintained his image, is by not answering questions of reporters, and he's running his campaign like that as well, limiting it to 4 questions, and then he's getting asked about his question limits and not answering those. So he's been very secretive about it, and he's you know, one thing about Harper is he's no dummy like maybe George Bush was. Harper's a very Machiavellian leader, and it's been part of his plan to kind of hide this aspect of his thing. You know, as they get more power, they get more comfortable to come out with this. But he's always had an agenda against cannabis. For years, he's been talking about his war against Beatles-era drug culture,
right? Exactly.
And you know, the influence these bad people have on society. And when questioned about his only if he'd ever used marijuana, he said he was offered a joint once, but he's too drunk. But then when they questioned him further about it and said, "Have you ever thought about it?" he said, "This is a question between him and his creator." And so this is a moral issue that he sees as a sin. And he's tried to justify this morality issue by hiring a Christian evangelical minister to do a $500,000 study on a link to establish a link between cannabis and schizophrenia. You know, what could be more Chris Somerville. What could be more schizophrenic than the evangelical belief system, you know, of heaven and hell and angels and devils and all sorts of discarnate entities? That's schizophrenia. So this guy, Chris Somerville, he's a minister at this church. Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit more about what this church believes. You know, Harper's putting these guys into power. He's surrounding himself with other people in his cabinet that do believe the same things, like Stockwell Day and others.
Yeah.
Right now.
Oh, it doesn't just influence drug policy. You know, it's influencing the conservative government's extensive support of Israel, undying support. You know. And this is all because Israel itself plays a role in the end times, prophesied in the book of Revelation, all signals of the coming of the Messiah. And, you know, people like Stockwell Day and James Looney over in Vancouver Island, and I believe the science minister also don't even believe in evolution. You know, Stockwell Day's minister of highways. You know, where do you think that fossil fuels come from? You know, like these people quite literally believe Adam and Eve were walking around with dinosaurs, and they're running the country. Yeah. They're running the country, you know, like these are the people running the country. This is what's happening. And what we're really under a threat of is that they're going to gain total control. Right now, they've been, you know, even under a minority government, they've still been able to backdoor some policies in that affect marijuana users. But I tell you, and the whole way they got this Bill S-10 as far as they did is because it was like under the threat of an election. But right now, we've got Harper at a weak moment with this contempt file and all these scandals going on in the government. And so we've got to hammer home this election. We've got to all vote strategically. Yes. We've all got to organize, and we've got to vote these conservatives out of power. That's our only hope as a cannabis reform movement, because we are, you know, going to be under severe oppression like we've never experienced before if these guys get a majority.
No kidding. And so, I'm really interested. It's crazy that they actually believe that the world is going to end, right? Is that?
It's like billions of people believe that. That's like the whole basis of Christianity is this apocalyptic scenario, you know. And, I myself, I'm like a member of Church of the Universe. We believe cannabis is a tree of life from Book of Revelation. So it is a subject that, I share some aspects of. I just have a different view of who's on the right of good and evil,
Well, I think that sometimes that's probably the criticism of these topics. These topics don't really come up a lot in Canada. Not very many journalists are talking about what you're talking about in your article here, because a lot of them feel, this is taboo, this is their own feelings. It doesn't affect how they make policies and that kind of stuff.
It totally affects policy.
In your article, you're linking direct stuff right to how they're making policies.
The whole rise of Harper came when Canada was just in the process of legalizing gay marriage. We were very close to legalizing cannabis. And Christian evangelicals down in the United States of America were worried about this Canadian influence. If these things happen in Canada, what could happen in the U.S.? And the same cabal of evangelical nutbars that got George W. Bush into power came down here in the to Canada. They started messing with Canadian politics like never before American, not just from the White House, and George W. Bush's White House, but also these Christian evangelicals. And that year, Harper, when that transition was happening, that election, he went through like a massive appearance and presentation change like never before. He came out of there smooth and a machine, as much as I'm critical of the guy, you have to admire how he's just taken a stranglehold on Canada and taking control of things with his Machiavellian ways.
Well, and how they frame these things, this whole election starts, they're constantly going after the coalition.
Yeah.
They're preemptively framing all the subjects so that anybody ever talks about it.
Harper's the child of a coalition, you know what I mean? Like the Conservative government was the Reformers and the Tories got together in a marriage made in hell, and the Christian right united, now they're really, what we really need in Canada is for the Liberals and the NDP to team up in a similar way, but you can imagine Harper's squeals of pain if that was happening.
Well, that's exactly what he's doing now.
Yeah, that's what he's doing now anyways, the guy backed out of this debate with Ignatieff now too, which is kind of interesting. He doesn't like to be asked questions because he's got answers he's got to give to some of these questions.
And he never does. He's been worse than any other prime minister in Canada in terms of treatment.
I think he's the most sinister prime minister of my lifetime for sure.
Undoubtedly.
Even way worse than Mulroney. You know what I mean? Like Mulroney was
sure.
like a
slimy
guy,
but how to give people access and stuff.
Harper's
just like a wall goes up. You don't know what they're doing. There's no transparency at all. And obviously that's why there's this whole contempt thing. It's about transparency. It's because they weren't actually telling the Canadian people and the other people in government how much the stuff was going to cost. They wouldn't disclose it.
They never did disclose it. They still haven't disclosed it. It wasn't worked into their budget. And, I think personally it's like a profit plan. Basically these are like the plan to privatize prisons, billions of dollars, harvest the public, shut them up, put them where they can't be heard, put them in prison, silence them up, start cashing in on them, and get the economy rolling by harvesting the left-wing pot-smoking public that they hate the most.
No, hey.
And, not only does he, declare war on Beatles-era drug culture, this slimester Harper has the nerve to sing John Lennon songs with signs like "I get high with a little help from my friends" on national TV with Yo-Yo Ma, and the hypocrisy of that is just unbelievable. Harper, Lennon was definitely, there's even a theory out there that by David Melville Levine that Lennon may have been persecuted for his pot smoking, assassinated for his pot smoking, pot support.
He's co-opting that image. It's interesting in your article.
I draw a parallel
Constantine
with Constantine in the 4th century, a Roman emperor who was facing a failing empire and fragmenting empire, and then one day before battle had a vision of the cross, the popular new symbol of the popular new religion, Christianity, in which hung a banner saying, "In this sign thou shalt conquer." And he took it as his banner and united the Rome under this, and banned all other religious cults and banned burning of incense, things like that. In a similar way, Harper's, declared war on a certain culture, and then he's using one of the icons of that culture, John Lennon, to try and sell his right-wing agenda.
Yeah, and it confuses, and it works. people are out there watching Harper and they think he's this cool hip guy and they're playing rock tunes and stuff. Because most Canadians aren't really reading between even reading the main lines, let alone reading between the lines. You know, how many people actually are out there reading the newspaper? It's pretty sad.
Yeah, well, you know, people are disillusioned with politics. I can't say I blame them. You know, it's not
it's not their fault.
It's not like I'm like in total admiration of any of the leaders. You know, I think Layton's not a bad guy, but you know, I don't think the NDPs are gonna get the amount of support to get to be prime minister.
Somebody was suggesting in the comments that you should run for the NDP, Chris.
Yeah, I don't think I would be a good choice. I've just got too much controversial stuff on the internet. I'd probably be a detriment to a thing like that. But I definitely think I could support somebody like Dana Larson, who is just doing such a bang-up job there running for the provincial leadership.
That's right. And if you haven't gone there yet, go to votedana.ca. Look at that. I even have a graphic here. VoteDana.ca. Go to that website. Find out how you can help Dana if you live in British Columbia. And even if you don't, there's lots of things you can do, spreading it around online. Dana's message is awesome, and there's definitely tons of content on the front page of Cannabis Culture that will give you a little bit more into what's going on with Dana. But I think, Chris, is there anything else that you wanted to say about it?
No, that's great. Yeah, check out the article if you get a chance, and get out there and vote. Encourage everybody to vote, and let's get Harper out of government, because if you're a pot activist, that is the best thing you can spend your time doing for the next 6 weeks.
Absolutely. This guy is our enemy number one. He is our worst nightmare. The pot community in Canada's worst nightmare. That's this conservative
Don't talk
party.
about Chris like that.
He's the sweetest dream that we have. Speaking of sweet dreaminess, Jacob Hunter.
What's up, everybody?
I don't know if it's look. We gotta maybe move the camera a little bit. That's okay. We can do a little tilting here. Tilt the screen a little. So Jacob is here to tell us about exactly how we. Nice. Yeah, we do have a few around here. There's another one. How you guys out there can help and what exactly we can do. How so far the campaign is going. And first, Jacob, I wanted you to explain a little bit to people about the difference in Canada between a minority and a majority government. For the people who don't know, this is...
First off, gotta get my Vote Dana on here. We gotta get the Vote Dana. Go to votedana.ca.
Here's the graphic. Woo! There we go.
That's right.
All right. So, okay, minority government, majority government. Why don't we want Harper to have a majority government, and what does that mean?
Okay, so basically we have 308 seats in the House of Commons. Whoever controls the most seats in the House of Commons is the Prime Minister. If you have less than half, then you're a minority government, which means that at any time the opposition can overrule you because they have more than 50% of the potential votes. If you get a majority, though, it means that no matter what, you can basically do whatever you want. And in Canada, under essentially the British parliamentary model, so this is Canada, Australia, and the UK, the Prime Minister in a majority can essentially do anything they want. So where this really becomes important for us is on judicial appointments. As many of you guys may know, the Prime Minister picks judges. The problem is that Harper's had 5 years to fill the benches with judges already, and we're now at a point where a majority of the Supreme Court will be eligible for retirement before the end of Harper's first term, which means Harper can get a majority on the Supreme Court of Canada, BC Court of Appeal, Quebec Court of Appeal, and Ontario Court of Appeal.
That would be so dangerous, so dangerous.
Exactly. So
and with the Senate, they already have stacked. This last time around, they've appointed so many new people to the Senate that the bills are just flying through.
Exactly. And so if Harper has a majority in the Supreme Court especially, what then happens is that Harper can essentially do anything he wants. So the medical marijuana program exists because, and the same is true as gay marriage, and the same is true of abortion in Canada, exists because the court said that it is unconstitutional to have criminal prohibitions against gay marriage, abortion, or medical access to marijuana.
Right.
Well, that's the courts that said it. Now, if Harper controls the courts,
guess what?
he can make the Constitution say whatever he wants. And I was explaining this to someone the other night. It's not like there's a section of the Constitution that says you have a right to marry whoever you want. It's not like there's a section of the Constitution that says you have a right to medication that works for you. The actual section in play here is Section 7. It says you have the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. All those words mean a lot of things, and they are widely open to interpretation, and that's our problem. So all that conversation really boils down to one thing. If Harper gets a majority, say goodbye to the medical marijuana program, say goodbye quite possibly to gay marriage, and get ready for a reopening of the abortion debate. And just because I've had this one online, for people who say, oh, but it would take so long for these cases to wind through the court, so even if Harper gets a majority, even if he gets a majority on the Supreme Court, it'll take years before these cases get there. Not true. Look at the Clarity Act. The Liberal government did what's called a reference question. And this is something any government can do, where they actually submit a bill or a policy to the Supreme Court of Canada and say, is this constitutional? Liberals did this with the Clarity Act, which was the act that outlined the criteria for Quebec to secede from Canada. So essentially, Harper can stack the court and then that day submit a reference case. It could be as few, in a few short months, Harper could rewind decades of social progress in Canada. If he gets a majority, that's what he can do, and we need to make sure he does not get that majority.
So how do we make sure that he doesn't? What can we do? What do people start doing to help us, help you?
Well, look, I mean, people need... I got an interesting statistic the other day. Of people in the marijuana community, these are self-professed marijuana activists, about 15% of them voted in the last election. And people say, oh, it doesn't matter if I vote, it doesn't matter if I vote. Here's why it does. Whenever you vote, you actually are giving a bunch of information about who you are. They don't know who you vote for, but they do know that you voted. And they also know your age, they know your postal code, your address, so they can find out all kinds of information about you. And what they consistently see is that people between 18 and 34 vote at a rate of about 1/4 of people who are 65 plus. So when a political party, who's, let's face it, their only concern is getting elected, when they're crafting their policy, what they do is they look at who votes, who's actually going to help me get elected. And they craft their policy around those demographics we see at the polling station. So even if you think, oh, well, the guy I vote for isn't going to win, that doesn't matter. Because the more people we have in the 18 to 34 bracket that vote, the more we're going to see good environmental policy, the more we're going to see good drug policy, and all these other progressive issues. Usage-based billing policy, as far as people who are concerned about internet rights, these are all young people ideas. And if we don't vote, political parties don't address them. There's a great clip from Rick Mercer. I'm not usually a fan, although he is my favorite CBC-based comedian from Newfoundland.
He's pretty funny.
He said that there are over 3 million Canadians in the 18 to 34 demographic, and as far as political parties are concerned, you might as well be dead. Now, what does that say? And he's right, because we don't vote.
Yeah.
So the number one thing you can do is get out and vote, take your friends out to vote. Don't even get them out of bed. Just drag them sleeping into the car, walk them in there. All you need to vote in this country is to swear a declaration that you live in the riding, have a piece of mail, have any ID. It is so easy. You don't have to pre-register.
Really
just
easy.
show up to the polling station. And even if your guy doesn't get elected, the fact that one more person in our demographic voted is going to be enough to change, at least in part, the way policy is developed in this country.
They're paying attention. They go where the votes are. And if they see that there's this many young people voting, they know what issues young people are into, and they'll start changing to suit that. This is how it works. They obviously, that's the only way they can stay. We still do have some democratic process, so let's use it. Please, please, everybody watching, you have to vote.
You know, people ask, I get a lot of the time, why isn't marijuana legal yet? We've been talking about this for 40 years. And there's all kinds of theories, and there's all kinds of talk about, well, where does the money go, and where is this and where is that, and that is all part of it. Don't get me wrong. The fact the police are the biggest lobby in this country in favor of prohibition,
Right.
but they aren't a big enough lobby to explain this insanity. The reason every single politician, whether they're NDP, Liberal, Bloc, even frankly the couple Conservatives that'll still answer the phone when I call, they all say the same thing. There are more votes on the side of prohibition than the side of legalization because people who like legalization are not voting.
Right.
That's it. We haven't. It's 40 years of us not voting. The one thing that hasn't changed, in fact, the thing that's gotten much worse, is our voter participation, and that's why this is still illegal because we don't vote. How it's as simple as one day every 4 years typically, or every couple of years in the last few. You just have to do one thing: just vote, and you're actually doing a lot to make this legal.
It's really not that hard. I mean, it really, and it's
actually quite simple. It takes,
especially in this country. In the States, you have to register. In Canada, you don't. You just show up with your piece of mail that says that, proves who you are and your ID or whatever, and you're in there.
And you can even do statutory declarations. This is something that was brought in because of homeless people having difficulty voting. If say Jeremiah and I walk in, we have no ID that proves we're from the riding. We have nothing. I can swear myself, IJ Hunter, from this riding. Or I can swear I know Big J Dizzle over here, he's from here. It's that simple. Like, you and a roommate can go in and vote. You by yourself can go in and vote. I mean, there's a whole thing about how they have to verify before adding and blah, 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 blah. It's better if you have a piece of ID. It's better if you can go in with 2 people. But just go. Like, even if you're not going to be there on election day, there's all kinds of advanced voting. And I know we've all heard this for years. I know every single person in this country has been told over and over, you gotta vote, you gotta vote. People died so you can vote. It should be really obvious right now. You look at Libya, you look at Tunisia, you look at Egypt, Bahrain, you look at Syria, at Jordan, all these places in the Middle East. These people are all going to the streets, facing governments they know will shoot at them, so they can have the right to vote. It's something so... It's hard to believe as a North American that people be willing to die for something we aren't even willing to do.
Yeah.
And yet they are, and they are in huge numbers. So, you know, it's I know it's a cliche, but you know what? If you go back and read Shakespeare, it looks like a cliche too, because everybody reused it because it's good. And this is the thing, it sounds like a cliche because it's true.
Yeah.
Right? You need to get out and vote, and if we don't vote, then we're saying goodbye to the medical marijuana program. I mean, you think that card's going to help if Harper has a majority in the Supreme Court? No.
It's not even, I mean, they're trying to screw with the whole medical marijuana system now, and they don't have a majority, and they've been pretty successful. So, yeah, this is, I mean, obviously it's bad. So so whyprohibition.ca is your website. What kind of stuff, what kind of tools and information are people going to find there that are going to help them get to know who they should vote for in their riding, that kind of stuff?
Now, here's what we've done. We made it real simple. We can send you an email that's going to tell you where to go to vote, who we think you should vote for, and what we've done with that is every riding where there's a chance for someone that is not a conservative to beat a conservative, we've identified who that person is, who their volunteer contact point is if you really want to get involved and help that candidate, and exactly where you can go vote for them. So as soon as all we need is your email address and your postal code, and trust me, you will get several emails coming up to voting day telling you where to vote and who to vote for. And there's 57 ridings in Canada that fit that criteria. All of them were won by less than 4% in the last election. We have a real capacity here to make a difference, and something I really want people to understand. We don't have to win. It doesn't have to be the Liberals that win, and then not for some crazy coalition thing. And the reason Harper is hitting this, it has to be a majority so hard, is because Harper knows this is his, 4th kick at the can? If he can't get a majority this time, the Conservative Party is not going to let him be leader anymore.
Exactly.
There are no other Conservatives that are well positioned. So if we cost them just a few seats, as long as they don't get a majority, we have a high probability that Stephen Harper will be forced to resign. The Conservatives have to appoint someone new who no one's ever heard of, and it'll put the Conservative Party back a decade, 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
This is great.
This is where the Liberals are now, you know. They don't have, sadly, and it's what Jake was talking about is the strategic voting. You know, in ridings, maybe explain how ridings work in Canada for people who aren't extremely familiar with things, Jake.
Okay, so in Canada, and like most participatory democracies, the population is divided up into different sections. In each one of those sections appoints or elects a representative. So in Canada, we have 308 ridings. Each one has an MP that represents it. Generally speaking, they represent about 100,000 people, although we have, because of the way Canada joined together in parts, for instance, in Prince Edward Island, one MP, one riding only has between 20 and 40,000 people. That's actually a lot of the reason why people from Alberta and British Columbia get so upset, but the same is true. Basically what it means is just that each riding represents a certain number of people with the exception of rural areas, which tend to have their votes count a little bit more. Right. So in each one of these, and then the party who wins the most ridings gets the most seats in the House and becomes Prime Minister.
So, and why it's important is because you're not actually voting for Stephen Harper, and you're not actually voting for Michael Ignatieff or Jack Layton or any of those people. You vote for a person in your own area. Now, what that means is if you happen to live in an area where the Liberals are very strong and the Conservatives are just about as strong, you might not want to vote for the NDP, because even if you love Jack Layton, you don't want the Conservatives to win. We need to get rid of these Conservatives. So vote for whoever it is that's going to beat them in your riding.
And that's why when we send you a list, I mean, we'll tell you honestly, if you live in most of Alberta, you don't really have another choice. It's vote for whoever you want to give $2 to, really, because that's how much the public subsidy of political parties is. But if you're in one of those 57 ridings, if we say, hey, opinion 8-tid, there we go, opinion 8, I thought that was a B. Your polling station is 5 minutes from your house walk, please vote for this NDP or Liberal. and actually in some cases it's block as well.
Right.
No matter what, just know that every single one of the opposition parties has been way better than the Conservatives. The Liberals finally opposed S10 at the end. The Bloc and the NDP opposed it the whole time. No matter what you feel, how you feel about any of these other political parties, a vote for anyone else, it's a vote for Harper.
Yeah.
And I hate to say it, I love, and I may get something thrown at me from across the room, love the Green Party. Unless you live in one riding in this country, it's kind of a waste. If the Conservatives are definitely going to win, vote your heart, give them the $2 subsidy, but in any riding where it's close, the Green Party is just siphoning votes away from people who can be Conservatives.
Right. No, it's true, and it's because of the parliamentary system we have now. If we had a system that actually looked at had some sort of proportional representation, or had looked at the popular vote, or maybe the Senate should be based on popular vote or something. But our system now is this parliamentary system, so we can use strategy to actually, manipulate the outcome a little bit differently. So, and right now it's coming down to Harper could seriously get in there and take over if we don't do it this way. And, as you said, when you do vote for other parties, though, they do get something, though.
Yeah, they get that $2 subsidy.
They get a $2 subsidy. So, but still,
But
do
even
you want
if
to
you go out and vote and just crash your ballot, even if, to be honest, it's getting those numbers in the 18 to 34 category. Because everyone over 65 votes, right? And that's it. People always say, oh, well, people will die off and everything will change. It's not really how it works. People, you often look at this and think about it logically. We have not had the same 65-year-olds since the 60s. The people who are 65 now were young in the 60s. They were in their 20s. But wait a second, people in their 20s and the 60s all wanted pot legalized. What's going on? And this is called the cohort effect. They map this in political science and social sciences, and you basically look at how people's political ideas change over time. And the issue is that something happens to people around, at a certain point, and it could very well happen to you. It happened to an entire generation of baby boomers, where they get to a certain age and suddenly all these beliefs go out the window. And that's something that the only way we can fix that, we can't just wait for these people to disappear, because the ones who are in their 40s and 50s now are just going to replace them. We need to get out there as 20-something, as teens, as 30-somethings, and vote.
Yeah, it's very, very true. Well, and they're great at, I think, they're so great at manipulating older people with fear and things like that. That's why I think people go conservative, is because it's the fear thing. All of a sudden, when you get older, you start wondering about all the stuff you got. Are people going to try and take it away from me? And then you got these conservatives saying, they are going to take it away from you. And really, it's pretty brutal that young people could walk in there at any time and just take this place over.
Yeah.
If we really wanted to.
If we all voted, every policy would be geared towards young people.
Yeah.
If we voted at the same rate as 65 plus, there's more of us. That's the sad thing. There are way more young people. It's just we're not voting. We just need to get out there. And
tell everybody in your family, all your friends, don't even tell them, just organize a car, organize something, a van, a bus, and get as many people there as you can.
And if you live in certain ridings, people especially, if you live in South Vancouver or anywhere around South Vancouver, go volunteer for Ujjal Dosanjh. There are a whole bunch of different MPs, and we'll be sending you this too. We'll tell you, please go volunteer for this person. They might not even be in your riding. You take Ujjal Dosanjh, he presented Mark's petitions in Parliament, spoke out against S10, spoke out in favor of reforms to the medical marijuana program. Certainly hasn't always been on our side, but definitely has been for the past few years. He only won by 20 votes in the last election.
Right.
And the Conservative that wants to replace him, completely opposed to the medical marijuana program. So if you live anywhere in South Vancouver and Richmond, any of these areas, go into that riding, help Ujjal Dosanjh. And there's a whole list of them. We're going to have all of them available on Why Prohibition. You'll be getting an email. Not everyone on the list gets it. We tailor them to the area, so only people within 50 kilometers of what we're asking people to go to will actually get the email. And that really is it. The two big things people can do is they can vote and they can get online at whyprohibition.ca. Mm-hmm. Just in the top right-hand corner, put in your email and your postal code, and that's all we need. We'll start sending you information about what you can do in your area.
Awesome. Now, I think we should maybe just talk a little bit more about why these Conservatives are such a danger. I talked a little bit about Bill S10 earlier and some of those mandatory minimums. But my interest is these Conservatives, they're not paying attention to the science that's behind these things. So when you look at Bill S10, for instance, with these mandatory minimums, there's so much science, tons of experts who have spoken about this, their own experts that they bring into the Senate and talk about it. Just a few years ago, when it was C-15, I think, is that when they brought in all the...
Well, they bring in police, right? And this is the thing, is that people kind of, the common problem we have is people don't understand what evidence is when it comes to the social sciences, because it's not like physics, it's not like biology where you have it's easy to execute an experiment. Social sciences rely on the ongoing experiment that is the passage of time.
Right.
So when we talk about evidence for things like S10, what we're talking about is what countries around the world have passed similar policies, and then what were the results over time. And what we can see is that in every single country that has passed mandatory minimums, they have made the problem worse on almost every single crime. The sole exception has to do with it's gun-related crime that's not gang-related. So the only people who are effectively, and it's only a tiny amount, deterred by mandatory minimums, are people who essentially get really pissed off and think about grabbing a gun, but then they go and make it a mandatory minimum, so they go beat the person up instead, right? Great, but it's not worth throwing a bunch of every other crime in jail for these things. So
right, exactly.
So it's just important to know that the Conservatives were not able to point to a single country, a single law, a single state, city, anything where these mandatory minimums have been implemented and done anything but increase the crime rate, increase the prison population, and most importantly, increase the violence of crime.
Right.
People need to recognize that if you are walking down the street with $100 in your pocket, you're going to be worried that someone's going to mug you, but it's not the same as if you're walking down the street with $100,000 in your pocket. You're going to be a little bit more anxious if that's the case. You're much more likely to carry a weapon. So when prohibition increases the price of these drugs, and these mandatory minimums increase the price of drugs, it just increases the likelihood that you're going to go, shit, I might want to carry a gun if I carry this much value with me.
And then that obviously leads to more violence happening with your gun, right? So it's true, man. Some of the stuff, obviously the Conservatives are saying, they're disputing what experts and that kind of stuff say, but it's also seems to be a war on logic itself with some of the stuff they're doing. Like with Stockwell Day coming out recently when
he's resigned.
He's resigned now, that's right, but all of these policies are the same, and the Conservatives were saying, well, it's unreported crime that we're going after, because there were a few journalists in Canada who stepped up and said, well, our crime rate has been going down every year for the past 30, 40 years.
Well, you know what they do? It's this exact same thing the Conservative Party does on the environment. It's the same thing that they did 30 years ago on tobacco. They literally are buying bullshit signs. You go to someone who, and this is the really fun thing, they don't go to find someone who is an expert in drug policy. Like they were talking about earlier, they go find some preacher. Right, which is the really funniest part, is you can really tell how junk the science is a lot of time just by looking at, so-and-so PhD. What's their PhD in? Because if it's not even remotely related to the field, usually you've got some bunk science. And so the Conservatives paid for bunk science on Insight that said that, it maybe saves one life a year. It was absolute bullshit. Mm-hmm. In fact, it was that study's own methodology, when corrected, proved Insight saved hundreds of lives per year. But they do the same thing with mandatory minimums. So they actually pay for this bunk science and then pretend that it's real. So when it comes to I can't remember the name of the group that came out with the unreported crime study, but it's a think tank that has actually put out a bunch of conservative propaganda on a bunch of different issues. They are essentially bunk right-wing scientists for hire, right. And usually don't even have scientific credentials. And the sad thing is, and this is, not to go back on too long a tangent, although after smoking a joint I do love tangents.
We should slow it down.
You look at these Conservatives cut education policy, and then they rely on tactics which require a less educated population. If people were more, one of the first things they teach you in university is how to tell the difference between a bullshit study and a not bullshit study. Why don't they teach that in high school?
No kidding.
Why don't they teach
public education?
And this is, if it weren't for this kind of willful, stupidification of the population on the Conservatives, then these tactics wouldn't work. And that's really the sad part about this, is it's a long game for them.
Yeah.
They cut education now so they can make even dumber claims later.
Well, it's true, and not only that, but look at what they do with the media, who obviously are consolidating as much as they can. In Canada, we have like 3 or 4 main media companies that own pretty much every single bit of media in the country. All the major daily newspapers, all the television stations, and of course the governments allow them to continue to do this consolidation. Just a few years ago, this was illegal in Canada and the United States to actually, you couldn't own a newspaper and a television station at the same time. But of course, they get rid of all these rules, and over time, that allows them to pretty much do whatever they want. They have this it's like Soviet Russia, basically. When the 1 or 2 companies just say what the government wants, I mean, really, total control of information. And public education, part of that, obviously, too.
It is. And I mean, this is why Harper so badly wants to get rid of the CBC. And this is why, and the reason it doesn't work well is in the UK is because they have the BBC. The reason that these kind of policies work so much better in the US is because PBS and NPR have been completely defunded. But the CBC stands as the one not totally bullshit organization. And at the same time, though, we have had, we've had tons of trouble with. There's a particular CBC editor here in Vancouver that just willfully refuses to cover anything marijuana.
Right.
So I time my press releases by when this person won't be working, because I know we'll get coverage if they're not there, but if they are, see you later. It's not, that's why you need this massive diversity of media to actually get past that kind of bias.
Well, it's true, and see, the CBC is our public broadcaster, so they receive funding from taxpayers, that kind of stuff. It keeps them a little less in the pockets and the total control of their advertisers and the corporations who are running all of that stuff. So that's good. What we need is more of that, more public media, more funding for independent stuff. My personal feelings about the CBC, I was a huge CBC fan until I saw Peter Mansbridge's coverage of the G20 event. And when, I was watching on YouTube police smashing through protesters with their clubs and cracking heads.
Nicole and I were there.
Yeah, you guys were there.
We were at the G20, and, it was amazing to see what we saw in person and then what was being reported on TV.
Right. And, Mansbridge saying, the police are doing a stellar job. It's amazing. And they just kept showing those police cars on fire everywhere, which was a total set-up photo opportunity.
30 minutes of a cop car on fire, really nothing.
Right. And nobody around. How did they get those cars? Jeez. Really strange, isn't it? Anyway, so there's obviously, we have some problems in this country with media and the way the government operates, and nothing's going to happen overnight, but voting really is you don't get any more simple and effective in making change in government than voting. That's it.
If we're talking about media, here's something else. There's a tactic in democracies, and in a lot of non-democracies too, it's called voter suppression. And we saw a textbook example of voter suppression this week, and it comes in the form of an attack on alternative media. Many of you posted on Facebook about presscorps.ca saying that Harper was declared in contempt, which was a criminal offense, and thus disqualified him from running for Prime Minister. Complete bullshit. Absolute nonsense, and it comes right out of the Conservative Party. And what it did, though, is it convinced many, many people that, I don't have to participate in this election.
Right.
He's already not allowed to be Prime Minister. Well, no, it's not that simple. So, I know a lot of you guys were looking at this. It's total bunk. It is absolutely voter suppression. Like that, and it's an attack on alternative media. And unfortunately, this happens too often. And we certainly get into debates about what's accurate and what's not in the alternative media. But there is absolutely voter suppression that goes on. And so it's really not as simple as saying don't watch the mainstream media or don't pay attention to the alternative media. The key is really being able to understand what's real science and what's real primary sourced information and what's total crap.
Yeah, some of it comes down to thinking for yourself, basically, and discerning what seems to make the most sense. With that Harper thing, it reminds me of in the States, you often hear about like the Republican Party sending out a bunch of letters to people that saying, the election day has changed, or, things like this. They do these sneaky little tactics that make people just like, whatever, feel they either don't have to be part of it at all. Yeah, with this Harper thing, that's pretty clever, man.
Yeah, well, and it is voter suppression. There's articles that put it on Wikipedia. It's really kind of sad, actually, how honest some... And what the sad thing is, and I loathe violating Goodwin's Law and making references to anything Nazi or the Holocaust, but if you actually if you go read up on Frank Lutz and Karl Rove, and they actually have the gall to admit that what they did was study the propaganda techniques used in Germany by the Nazis and try to learn what worked from that. They fully admit that. It's in one of Lutz's books. it's really
Goebbels.
Yeah, it's frightening what people, and what really scares me is that people don't kind of think maybe what I'm doing might be slightly unethical. Like when you go and start like, man, those Nazis sure knew how to run things.
Yeah.
I'm gonna check that out. Like really, you don't ever think to yourself, maybe that's even fucked up, but
Maybe they just don't care. I think that's what it comes down to.
Maybe people do it when they have no choice.
Well, that could be part of it too. I don't know. I have a feeling that a lot of these people are just they're monsters. Inside, they're probably in a lot of pain and they probably hurt. People are emotional, crazy. The people in government are just like other people that you meet in your life. You have probably a lot of people that are in your family that you think are emotional and crazy. People in power are just the same as that.
well, we don't teach ethics, and this is it. We don't teach ethics or civics in school, and this is common in the United States and Canada, where you go to university and start talking about philosophy, and it's all the philosophy of ethics. Well, why aren't we talking about this in high school? Why aren't we teaching people in school about your rights and responsibilities in a democracy, about why it's important to vote, about why is it that I get reporters, I've had parliamentarians ask me questions about process. Oh, well, wait a second, what happens if then I'm like, you're in the House of Commons and you don't know the process. It's overly complex and massively undereducated.
Yeah.
And it's not the fault of
true.
these MPs, it's not the fault of these reporters, it is a really complicated process, and quite frankly, I have to go look it up a lot of the time too. It's just...
what happened recently when one of the reporters at the Vancouver Sun reported that Bill S-10 had actually passed the Senate weeks before it did.
Yeah.
And it passed one reading, and she reported that it did.
passed committee.
Or it was committee, that's what it was. Yeah, it passed the committee, but they reported that it passed the whole Senate, and nobody could figure out how. I actually tried to find out myself by calling the Senate office and all these different places, and really, they were all fumbling around. They couldn't figure it out either. They couldn't actually tell me one way or another. That we just have to wait for the website to be updated.
Yeah, they all check Hansard and on the Senate. Yeah, I mean, it's terrible. And it's funny, you guys were talking about transparency, and I saw a great quote on Twitter the other day, and it was that it was at PM Harper, transparency in government does not mean being invisible.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it applies to the Senate as well. And it's true. I mean, they don't put this information up. Nobody even knows what happened, including the people in the Senate.
Who's actually paying attention to the political process in this country? The people watching this show are probably interested in politics, but your average Joe out there, they just don't think that it's part of their life. They don't see what's interesting about it or why it affects them. Man, it's sad. Jacob, before we go, I did see in the comments somebody asking about what's going on with your case.
Yes.
Yeah, so we should talk a little bit about that. Maybe explain what happened first.
So we went, as part of the Free Mark protest, we went out to Rob Nicholson, who actually extradited Mark. We went out to his office to have a protest. And a constable there named Chris Stewart decided to assault me and arrest me for what was later admitted to court. No evidence of any illegal activity whatsoever.
Was he RCMP or was he a local police?
It was Niagara Regional Police. If you go on My Prohibition and search his name, you'll see that lots of articles about him because
say his name again?
Chris Stewart.
Chris Stewart. Chris Stewart.
Yeah, but so anyways, they admitted in court that nothing illegal had happened and dismissed all the charges. There's a lot of talk about whether or not to execute a civil action. In Canada, it's not like the U.S. If you sue somebody, you are liable for damages if you lose.
Right.
And it would cost us many, many thousands of dollars to sue, and the likely outcome is they won't admit any wrongdoing. You can't force them to admit any wrongdoing, and they will give me something like $75 for the amount of time, the 6 hours or so I spent in lockup.
Right.
So it's like, wow, so we spend several grand to get $75. It's and no admission of guilt. It's pretty lame.
It wouldn't really be worth it, obviously. Well, that's good. Glad to hear that it got dealt with anyway. So.
Yeah, it's done. It's and same with Nicole's charges. Everything's all completely done. We were vindicated. It is completely legal to protest inside a member of Parliament's office, even after hours. We found out doing legal research. So
right.
Yeah, it's and quite frankly, if the Conservatives, whomever gets into power in this country, if Mark's application sits on that desk for too long, we will become a threat to them.
Absolutely, we'll be back. Yeah, they can't hide. Like we said before, there's nowhere they're going to go. Their office is right there, so storm them. Storm in there. They can lock the doors.
Yeah, and we can hang out outside and make a ton of noise in front of the people.
Right.
Like we
have
did
a
in
little barbecue on the
Saxon's, right?
patty. Exactly.
And that's
chalk
another
it
thing
up.
too.
Bring your chalk.
Last year we just announcing that we would, on X day be doing a occupational or mainland. They actually closed 6 ridings. They closed 6 offices for the day. which the Liberals had some
Shut them down.
But I mean, that was the thing, is just threatening to protest there can shut these offices down. And you know,
they run from these issues. That's how you know we're right, and we're, you know, eventually the truth will prevail on these things, because they hide when the light shines on them.
And one of those ones that hid there, Andrew Saxton, is on the list of Conservatives that can be defeated. So if you live in North Vancouver, vote for your Liberal candidate. That's who I know the NDP candidate there. He's a great guy. I wish he was in a position to win. Unfortunately, we've got to vote strategically in that riding. So if you're from North Vancouver, vote for the Liberal and defeat the coward Andrew Saxton, who closed his office for weeks on end.
Elizabeth May in her riding of Saanich Gulf Island, she's against a Conservative. He won the 2000 vote.
Elizabeth May, Jody says, if you're in that riding.
Saanich Gulf Islands.
Saanich Gulf Islands. Yeah, and so whyprohibition.ca will have tons of information for you guys.
Just remember, email and postal code. Just go on. If all you do is go there to type those things in and click send, that's it. We will send you all this information by email. It'll all be particular to you. That's why we get your postal code from you. And again, we'll be sending you where to vote, when to vote, who to vote for. Done, done, done. Let's just defeat these Conservatives and actually have a real progressive government in this country for the first time in 5 years.
That would be fantastic. All right, Jacob, thanks a lot for coming
Thanks,
on.
sir.
Much appreciated.
Everybody.
We're going to be talking about the election, obviously, a lot in the next couple of weeks. We'll keep you guys posted on what's happening. Definitely check us out next week, Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific time again. And all right, guys, glad to see everybody in the comments and stuff. It was a good show. Thank you, guys, and we'll see you next week.